this week, the Trump administration reversed an Obama administration's directive to reduce the use of private prisons. Instead, private prison companies who invested hundreds of thousands of dollars in Donald Trump's presidential campaign were now given the green light to make huge profits by building more prisons and keeping even more Americans in jail. Should we stop corporations from profiting by incarcerating our fellow Americans? Joining me now is Anthony Gangi, a correction advocate and activist. He is host of Tier Talk. Anthony, first of all, the reason this was reversed by the Obama administration in the first place, among other things stated at the time, was taking the profit out of those that not only want to incarcerate people for over longer periods of time than the crime may have fit, but in many cases setting up situations where it's just making huge profit of arresting and incarcerating people that thin to little evidence is there at all.
Well, actually, we agree on the fact that prison for profit is definitely something that should not be done. First off, I want to thank the brave men and women who work behind the wall. I want to thank them on a national level because their job goes unrecognized, and I want to thank you for having me on the show. Thank you. I appreciate that. My concern is part of the reason also why Obama was doing away with privatized prisons was also because of safety and security concerns. When you owe total to shareholders and you're not worried about the responsibility of what it takes to maintain a safe and secure facility for not just the inmates who reside there, but also for the staff who work there, because staff, correctional staff, do set the canvas for rehabilitation to occur. Now remember, I believe in the system. Yeah. Okay, I do believe the system works. I've had inmates, mentoring inmates, tell me that the system works. Parents tell me, thank God my son's in jail, or thank God they're in prison, because if we're on the streets, God knows where they would be. So the system does work. And if we base the system on these extremes that occur on the news, where we take those extremes and we generalize it as this is what defines the system, you're going to find many people that are going to step up and say that's not true. Because there are, believe it or not, prisons can no longer be seen as just a dead-end road. It can be seen as a place of hope if you do things correctly.
But it also can be argued on the other side that prisons have clearly been used to over-penalize people, and in some cases penalize people that shouldn't be penalized. But where we agree, and that's why I wanted to have you on with you and I one-on-one dealing with this, where we agree is whether you're on the side of those working in the prisons or those that have been incarcerated. The profit in it really takes away from both.
Yes.
The correction officers and those that are incarcerated. So there's a mid-ground here, or common ground here, for advocates on both sides.
You're 100% correct. It's actually the first time we're actually together on common ground. Believe it or not, correctional staff and inmates do share one thing, and we share the fact that we want to go home. And I believe right now with, unfortunately, let's just also not. Unfortunately, with certain issues with the state facilities and privatized correctional facilities, it's very hard now to say that one problem's isolated from the other. Right now, I believe that the correctional system does need a sense of revamping. It does. Don't get me wrong. I know it does. It's bleeding from the inside. And I believe that we have to do what we can to make sure that we show the truth about what corrections is, because I'm telling you something, the system does work. It does. Having said that, it's not geared for profit. Human life is not geared for profit. If I may mention something too,
human life is not geared for profit on either side.
On either side, and that's where we're on the same page. An inmate's life is just as valuable to us as a correctional officer's life. Trust me.
But if you have privatized prisons, you have people that are stockholders, all they're interested in is their profit.
And I agree with you 100%. And if I want to add something else, whether on politics or not, I don't usually stand on the extremes. I believe the road is a compromise in the middle, where I get your perspective, you give me mine, and we constructively build. That's why I want to thank you for coming on the show, because you guys see me on shows before, and the fact that now we're actually having a communication saying, hey, we're on the same page. I want to mention something too. There's these Blue Lives Matter laws that are being passed that are affecting law enforcement. Corrections doesn't know if they're involved in those protection laws.
corrections may not be involved.
We may not be involved in those laws because corrections is not recognized as law enforcement nationally. Some states are, some states aren't. So if Trump wants to do the right thing here, hypothetically, we got to start recognizing those brave men and women who risked their lives behind that wall, because the brave men, if I may.
So let me get this right.
Yes.
With all of his pronouncements and about standing by our law enforcement community, which all of us stand behind law enforcement. None of us are anti-law enforcement. But with all those pronouncements, he has not made sure to include correction officers.
I agree. You see, the problem is corrections isn't recognized as law enforcement across the state, across the country. Maybe that deals with consistency and training, because if you look at it, you'll see some correctional agencies, they train for 3 weeks, some do 15, 16 weeks. There's got to be more consistency with the training that you're providing these correctional officers. Having said that, the laws that are passed right now, you don't know, am I covered in that? You know, because some states that don't recognize corrections, well, guess what? If you don't recognize corrections as law enforcement, then that bill is fruitless to those who work corrections.
So they've run past the consideration of the humanity of the inmates, whether they're there justifiably or not. They've run past the humanity of correction officers and just took care of those that are going to make a profit.
I agree. And again, just mentioning this, I believe that there is motivation behind what he does, and I believe the motivation isn't pure. And again, I could be wrong, you know, and I'm just kind of giving my opinion, because my number one objective is taking care of those brave men and women who are forgotten behind that wall. And I think the truth comes out when you go to privatize. I think if ever we were to understand his motive, at least corrections is now going to know, well, wait a second, this person that we thought was helping us may not be. And if I just may add one more thing, because I know we got to get close to a segment here, is I would like to kind of start informing people about the truth, bring that middle road together. I do it on my show all the time. I think it's about getting people with experience that could sit down with you and say, hey, you know what, I understand your perspective, Rev. I do. So if you can understand mine, we both value human life, correct?
That's what it's all about, valuing human life, all human life. That's why I wanted to have this conversation. We're going to hear from the other side as the weeks go on. Thank you, Anthony Gangi. Up next,